Welcome everybody to the show. It is gonna be the show, I guess, from now on because sometimes, like I said previously with Ronald, it sometimes sticks in the Green Mountains, and then sometimes it just goes beyond the Green Mountains. So in this case, I'll just call it to the show. You apparently know what show this is on because you clicked it. But without further ado, we have a guest that hasn't been here since September of last year, I think it was. And now that it's almost getting close to, well, as you're probably hearing this, it's going to be World UFO Day. And why not talk about this interesting area in northern East Kingdom of Vermont, which, by the way, before I just make it even more rude, but Aleks Petakov, welcome back.
Thanks for having me, man. Good to be back.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk to you. Last time it was like Champ and one of your Bigfoot ones. I can't even think of the title right now, but I just remember that much. So anyway, how you been?
Doing all right. Yeah. Excited to talk about, some of this really cool stuff in Vermont. I was a New Hampshire guy. Obviously, I like New Hampshire. I love Vermont too, though. It's, kind of neighbor state, and Vermont has, I would say, probably even more weird stuff than New Hampshire. New Hampshire has a lot of weird stories, but Vermont definitely has some really unique places, including East Mountain, which is one of my favorite spots. So I'm excited to talk about that, and Bennington Triangle and some of the other stuff. And Champ, of course, is a fun one. Just like I said, Vermont just has a lot of really cool folklore and history and weird stories over the years.
Yeah, and I think what's cool when we get into the UFO base, I think Northern Eastern Kingdom or Northeastern Kingdom, however you want to
they call it the NEK, the Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah. And I mean, I have been doing some digging, and I've noticed that there's a lot going on up in that northern part of my state. Not just weird cryptids and like UFOs, but there's a lot going on between missing people, possibly an Abenaki cursed land type thing with like the Ace Wonder of the World by Ripley, believe it or not, with this like water supply that's supposedly separated by like 7 or 8 different minerals and stuff like that. Like, it's crazy, dude. It is.
Yeah, crazy. It's funny because there is a lot going on, but there isn't at the same time, because it is like the sparsely, I think it's one of the more sparsely populated parts of Vermont. I mean, Vermont's generally pretty rural, right? But even for Vermont standards, the Northeast Kingdom is extremely rural. You have a lot of areas that are part of like wildlife refuges. There's a Sylvia O'Conti wildlife refuge. There's a couple of other ones. There's even like a random parcel of land up there that's part of the Green Mountain National Forest, which is kind of surprising because I've looked through the maps. So that's how I know it. The rest of the Green Mountains are all found down, in the central and southern part of the state, like Bennington, and then up towards like Camel's Hump and south of there. So there isn't really much in the northern part of the state, just like random little patch up there.
Yes.
It's the part I'd say that reminds me a lot of northern New Hampshire. You've got Coos County, New Hampshire, which is the furthest north county in New Hampshire along the Canadian border. That's what borders the Northeast Kingdom there. They're both extremely low population, tons of moose everywhere. Like, you can barely go in the woods without seeing a pile of moose scat in both Northeast Kingdom and Coos County. Coos County has a lot of cool Bigfoot stories. It's got the kind of wood devil story from back in the day, which is a fun one. And every time I go up to like the Coos County area, you're like very close to the Vermont border. And even driving through parts of New Hampshire, like south of Coldbrook, and you look over into the mountains, there's like a river that's the border between New Hampshire and Vermont. And you can see up actually on East Mountain, you can see these little squares on the top of the mountain from, miles and miles away. And those are actually the old radar towers. So yeah, the Northeast Kingdom is pretty cool. So again, there's like driving through there, you get this feeling of desolation. It's stunningly beautiful. And you have all kinds of mountains and weird stories up there too.
I mean, it's World UFO Day for July 2nd here, and it's actually kind of funny how this happened because, Alex, I mean, I was on, I was in the chat listening to you talk with Aaron about the Beyond the Trail thing, and you had mentioned about possibly having like your own experience. I feel like I've had almost like like a weird experience myself. Whether it have been maybe a drone or a UFO, I don't know, but it was still odd enough. But what happened was I had forgotten about it because I kind of just said, yeah, it's a drone, you know. And then finally, after 14 years later, it took literally this long. And there was another podcast that did like a call-in show. And this guy from Connecticut had called in to describe pretty much the same concept that I had seen. The only difference was his vanished, mine didn't. So it was just weird. So in a nutshell, basically when I used to do traffic control, I had like, you know, what kind of like what we are having right now in the New England area, which is like the clear blue sky, some cloud, but not enough to really like cover the whole area. But it felt like at this point in time when I was in the traffic control that I looked at this particular spot around Route 22A in Vermont. I just don't remember if it was Fairhaven or any other part of whatever Route 22A goes through. But what was odd is it was almost like somebody took like a Sharpie and just kind of put a dot right in the sky. And that's how I noticed this black dot. And I was just like, that's odd. So I took note of this, and we went to lunch, came back, and this thing was still there.
Oh, interesting.
So, and what made it even more weirder was by the time I had radioed my partner, who is sadly no longer on this earth, he had passed away in 2016. So there goes my own one and only person that could help me with the story. But the fact is, I tried to radio him to ask if he could see it. He could not see it. And I said, okay, so when we get back, if we get a chance and if it's still there, I will point to it to see if you can see it. So we finally get together, and as soon as I go to point at it, it takes off. As soon as I go to point at it. But it stayed there throughout the entire time. The only thing I can think of is if it was a drone, maybe it went back to get a battery pack when we left for lunch. But the more digging I did for around the 2008, let's just say 2009 era, drones had any life between 10 minutes to 2.5 hours from what I understood. Well, by the time I got back from lunch that day from 12:30 to what would that be, 3 o'clock, it was still there. So it was obviously there longer than 2.5 hours. But what was it? I don't know.
That's weird.
So, but basically the connection here is that thanks to that caller from Connecticut, he had seen a black dot, but his vanished. His didn't just like fly away like mine did. But I just thought it was weird because it was just as I pointed at it. So as soon as I put my pointer finger to it, that's when it moved. And I was just like, right, that's weird. Anyway, another weird little story, coincidence or not, I don't know. But back in 2023, I had seen like this white light fall from the sky and hit the ground, but there was no sound. So I coughed it up as a meteor. And then what was it? A couple weeks ago, we just had that meteor hit around Rhode Island or something. And it supposedly made like an explosion sound.
Oh, yeah. I remember seeing, I think, news stories about that.
So, so then again, here we are again. And it's just like, well, that's interesting because mine didn't have any sound. The one that I saw.
Yeah, I saw people posting videos of that supposed meteor or whatever sounds they heard. I don't know. Yeah, I've heard all kinds of weird theories. People like, oh, it was a Russian missile hitting something. Like, there's all these crazy stories, right? Yeah. People don't really know what's going on. But a lot of like those Ring doorbell cameras and some of the other cameras, surveillance cameras, were picking up just like a sound and shaking or something like that. So I really don't know what to make of it. I mean, I haven't looked into it enough, I guess, to conclude one way or another what was really going on.
Yeah, I just can tell you what I had seen, and I can just tell you that whatever I saw had no noise when it vanished from hitting the ground or whatever it did. So I just thought it was just odd. And I wish that one didn't take 14 years. So you know what I mean? But anyway, yeah. So I just know you had seen something. Maybe the only thing that I just wanted to know prior to what you had seen was, like, what color was it? Just white? Because that's all I kind of remembered. Like, you saw this white, right?
Yeah, I've seen a couple of things I would consider, UFOs by definition of the word, or UAPs, whatever we want to use the term. The one I saw in Northern California was just like, it was like a star color, and it was so far in the sky, just zipping around. Yeah, but it was so far away, so like it would look white, look like a star, right?
Yep.
And then what I saw in Pennsylvania back in 2019 was it was like a whitish light. It just looked like a cloud that was illuminated, like a little kind of undefined cloud, and it was just like lit up, and it was just kind of moving through the sky, and these smaller orbs shot out of it and like flew around it, or circled around it. I don't know. But it was basically just white colored, like the entirety was whitish, kind of.
Yeah, whitish glow.
Description wise, yeah, it was weird. I mean, I don't know. I heard people say, well, maybe it was a satellite launch for the Tesla thing. There's one supposedly around that time. Maybe that's what it was. I really don't know. I just know I was with some people who were more into the UFO stuff than I was. They were like seasoned UFO people, and they were like, wow, that's the weirdest thing we've ever seen. And then the next night we had like this weird audio thing happen where it was like cloudy, and there was like this sound moving through the sky, and it sounded like it started in the house, and then it went outside the house and was like moving in the sky, and then just like stopped. It was bizarre. Yeah, it's a long story. But that's kind of like the gist of it. It was like, in terms of the visual aspect, it was just a whitish kind of light sort of thing.
It didn't sound like a horn or anything, right? Like you hear about that mysterious sound, right? Where, what do they call it? I think it might be from Alaska, where they dubbed that incident like Gabrielle's horn or something. You heard about
we didn't. When we saw the object, we didn't hear anything. It was completely silent. The next night, like 24 hours later, is when we heard an object that originally we were in like a basement. It sounded like it started in the basement, and we thought it was like some kind of equipment going off. And the homeowners were sleeping in the bedroom above where we were in this garage, myself and some investigators. We were worried about waking up the homeowners. So we were like trying to find somewhere to turn this. It was like a C tone. It was like, It was like a C tone. So we had two audio engineers look at it, and they both concluded it was like a not natural C tone type sound. And it sounded like it was in the house, and we're all like scrambling around. And as we're moving around in this garage basement, it sounds like it's outside, and we move outside, and it's like in the air. I mean, it was strange how it sounded like it was in the house, and then it was not anymore. It was in the air, and you could hear like the sky was pretty like overcast. So there was a lot of cloud cover, but you could hear like the sound move from one area, and then it went over this forested area, and just kind of like, we have the audio of it. It just kind of cut. It just went beep. It didn't fade out. It just kind of was like if you hit pause on the button or something. You know what I mean? Geez. Like, I don't know. It was weird. It was like almost like one of those Tibetan singing bowl kind of sounds, like a something like that. And there was a guy that was messing with the CE5 protocols, the Stephen Greer stuff. That same night he was messing with that stuff, and I don't know the validity of that. I don't know anything really about it. I know Stephen Greer has a lot of people don't like him. I really have no leg to stand on here because I have not looked into it enough. I'm just telling you, I was with people who were more into UFOs, and this guy was like playing these frequencies on his phone, and then we had some weird audio incident that night. I'm not saying that validates the frequency stuff, but it was weird. It was just, the first night there was no frequencies, nothing. We saw this weird UFO-like object, and then the night after that, we had this auditory experience in like virtually the same area where this UFO thing happened, where it was just like above us, this farmhouse kind of. We were in rural Pennsylvania, so Yeah, that's pretty much it with that, you know.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's still interesting enough. Yeah, I mean, kind of remind me when we had that weird drone incident last year or the year before, whenever the hell it was. But anyway,
New
that's a
Jersey.
whole different stupid rabbit hole we could always go into. But I think most of it was just drones and people doing the scare tactic thing. But anyway, that's my own opinion. But
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, on to just the East Mountain thing. First off, let's just do a little backstory, I guess, of the East Mountain radar. So this is what I have. It was the East Mountain radar base, officially the former North Concord Lyndonville Air Force Station during the Cold War relic in East Haven, Vermont. It operated from 1956 to 1963, so 7 years. The site was designed to detect incoming Soviet bombers. Today, the ruins are abandoned, heavily vandalized, and on Vermont's hazardous sites list as of today. During the Cold War era, it was built for about $20 million, which I don't know what that would be in today's money right at the moment. But at the 3,436 foot summit of East Mountain, Essex County, and et cetera, et cetera. The base acted as an early warning radar post. It was staffed by over 150 personnel, effectively doubling the local population of East Haven at the time, which is pretty crazy in itself to hear that. Otherwise, the UFO connection would be in 1961, unexplained 18-minute aerial event which tracked over East Mountain. Hours later, a New Hampshire couple famously claimed to experience an alien abduction nearby, a legend deeply tied to the local lore, which, as we know today, as Betty and Barney Hill incident. The rapid closure, and this is what I have left for East Mountain, is advances in early warning technology made the base redundant, and then it closed in 1963, only 7 years after opening. That's what I have for that.
Yeah, I mean, what do you want me to get into specifically?
Specifically, is so how did your strange places capture this East Mountain thing to make you want to get this small crew to come up there to start checking it out?
Yeah, it's a place I've always been interested in. I heard stories about it many years ago. It's become a pretty popular location, and it's actually interesting. Just a little more backstory, I think, um, from what you just read. So it was really only open for less than 10 years, but it originally was called the North Concord Air Force Radar Station, and then a couple years before it was closed, it was changed to the Lyndonville Air Force Radar Station.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know why they changed the name. They had done some retrofitting. I heard up to 171 service members were there at the time of like the height of its operation. But what's weird is geographically, it's kind of a strange area because it's located on East Mountain, which is Essex County, Vermont, in the Northeast Kingdom. And East Mountain is a 3,400 plus foot peak and has phenomenal views. That's why it was chosen to be, a location for radar facility. Like, because you can see into Vermont, New Hampshire, Canada, into Maine, probably across from New Hampshire. It has some of the best views in all of New England, in my opinion. And I've hiked all of the New Hampshire 4,000 footers years ago. And you get some of those mountains, you have beautiful views into the Atlantic Ocean from places like Mount Washington and elsewhere. This one has such great views because you're above it all. Like, you're on top of the mountain and then you're above everything on a radar tower.
Right.
But it's a really weird facility in that, again, geographically it's tricky because, again, technically it's in East Haven, but also it's technically in North Concord. So it's East Haven, North Concord, and then to get in there you have to go through a little town called Victory Mills, which is it's as rural as you can get a town. I mean, I would be surprised if the population's like 60. And then you have nearby Lyndonville. So it's very confusing as to what town it belongs to. It's kind of like there's different, I guess it depends on who you talk to. I think technically it's part of East Haven, but it's all so interconnected in that area. So yeah, again, what got me interested was just I'd always wanted to go there, and for some reason I'd put it off for a while, and it became pretty well known in the kind of urban exploration circles. I like urbex, so that's how I originally heard about this facility, and I didn't even really know about the UFO connection until I read about it. But that wasn't like my primary interest at the time when I first heard about it. This was like over a decade ago. And I noticed that, once these urbex people started going there and the location was relatively unknown. I mean, I've talked to people who grew up going there back in the 70s and 80s, other times after it was decommissioned. And, even if you look at videos, basically when those urbex videos started coming out, started hitting social media, especially post 2020, a lot of people started going there and like vandalizing the site, heavily destroying it, knocking things over, graffiti everywhere, leaving trash. If you watch a video of the place from like 2015 to 2025, same building, same everything, you can see the level of destruction. It's absolutely unfortunate. People just have to destroy it. It's usually younger kids, teenagers, 20s, going up and think they can just do whatever they want, to a place that is almost like a historical site, but it's not obviously protected. It's technically on private land. So I'd wanted to go. And then when we first went in 2024, we learned that there was a major incident in the winter time where people were trying to drive up to this facility. And again, I should mention how remote of an area this is. I mean, Victory Mills, the town that you go into, or there's another direction to get to the base too. You're on these logging roads in the middle of nowhere. It's extremely remote. Like you're basically on your own, no cell coverage. You have some coverage up on the base, but not as much. You get decent coverage because you're prominent area, and I think Burke Mountain has like a tower on it or something. But when you're in the valleys and down in the woods, there's nothing. It's very dangerous. So people started driving up there, like somebody in like a 2-wheel drive tried to drive up in the winter time, got stuck in like 4 feet of snow, and it turned into a very costly operation. And I think either the local community or Essex County, whoever, said that they are no longer really doing rescue operations there, and like you will be charged the full amount if something happens. So they started locking the gates. The logging company started locking the gates that the logging roads to access the base itself. And they usually now, from what I understand, they don't really open it until later on in like June, something like that. So we wanted to go in May, and we know the gates were going to be closed. We wanted to really have the place to ourselves, because a lot of times if you go any other time, you're going to have a lot of people driving in, that kind of thing. So we hiked in, and it's like a 18-mile round trip hike, I think.
Yeah, I think I heard 20-mile round trip.
Yeah, I estimated it like it's technically it's 9 in and 9 out, but I just rounded up to 20. Yeah. But it's about 18 or so, 18 or 19. Because you're mostly just from where the gates are locked in Victory Mills all the way to the base. It's a long hike because you're just walking on these logging roads. So it's really boring and quite tiresome, because you're just like walking on a dirt road where that would be a 20-minute drive normally, and it takes like a 3-hour hike, especially with a big backpack. So we did a hike in, and we spent the night there. And you have to understand, at the base, so there's 2 facilities. There's a I guess they call it the containment area, but that's like everyone just calls it the lower base. So you have
the homestead, right? Is that the one with the houses?
Yeah, so it's like the lower base. That would have been the housing units. It's at the kind of the base of the mountain. I mean, you're still getting up in elevation once you get to that point, because the road starts going up. But that was where you had people living, so you can still see remnants of some of the bunkers there. What was the mess hall? There's still the gym. There used to be a bowling alley supposedly there. From what I heard, there was like a mural painted of Chicago inside, because a lot of the service members there were from Illinois and Chicago. And so, and it was like very tough. From what I've read, accounts of people that were stationed there are like, oh, my dad was stationed there. Some of the accounts I read online, people said it was extremely boring. They used to have a bus that would take them into St. Johnsbury, Vermont.
Yep.
Into that area, like people could go to the movie theater, and it was kind of supposed to be a top secret facility because of the remoteness of it and the task of monitoring Soviet craft. But as you mentioned when you read the kind of intro there, it doubled the population of the area because it's so sparsely populated there. So a lot of like local people would have known about, hey, there's all of a sudden these guys from Chicago coming in on a bus all the time. So I don't think it was kind of like a well-known secret in the area, but there was 170 something people, I think, living there at one point. So it was a big facility. And so you had, again, two facilities, the lower base where mostly everyone lived. You can see old pictures. There's even old pictures on some of the .gov websites. And I have a lot of those in the documentary and that sort of thing. There's a couple websites that have a lot of historical pictures from there. So that's the one part of the base. And the second part you can see from the road going in or going up the mountain, up East Mountain itself. That was where the radar towers were. So that is like another almost 2-mile trek up the mountain. That's where the road gets really kind of windy and crazy. So hiking that was pretty rough. And it starts getting pretty steep, and you start going from that deciduous type of forest you see across that part of Vermont and much of New England, northern New England especially. And as you start getting up in elevation, suddenly all those deciduous trees drop off and it's all coniferous. You're talking about like pines and spruce and that sort of stuff. It just starts popping in and it becomes, totally different environment. You're not quite in the alpine zone because you're not that high enough elevation like you would be on Mount Mansfield or Mount Washington or wherever. But you start getting into that where it's like, it looks like it's a totally different environment than lower in the valley. And then that's where the radar towers are. And there's 5 towers total. There's 3 smaller ones and 2 larger ones. And now I don't exactly know the full history of the towers themselves. I think the 3 smaller ones are the original towers. And then they were doing like retrofitting and then new installations. So the 2 bigger towers are from the newer period. And from what I understand, by the time they finished the one of the newer towers where they were going to put the brand new radar, it was already obsolete by the time they finished it. They already had come up with better technology. That's why ultimately it was like 1963, I believe, when they closed the base down.
Yeah.
And pretty much since then it's been abandoned. I mean, actually it hasn't been fully abandoned. There was heard stories that after the government sold it off, it was bought, by private. It's been in private hands since then, I should say. And there was a guy who used to live there. I heard stories of people saying like, there's all kinds of crazy rumors and stories like, oh, I was up there with the Hells Angels. They used to hang out up there. That was like their hideout. There's a guy who says that he used to live in the lower base and had like a workshop. There's all kinds of stories. There was even a couple instances of like a lot of people like to snowmobile up there to this day. I think it was back in the 80s. One of the previous owners had put up like a barbed wire on some of the trails, and one of the snowmobilers actually got decapitated while riding through, and like that was a big issue, and a lot of trespassing and vandalism and people wanting to check it out because naturally, as somebody that likes urban exploration stuff, abandoned locations are cool. And I think the coolest of abandoned locations in general are military installations, abandoned military installations, because usually they're in very secretive areas or there wasn't a lot known about them. And I think, in my opinion, the North Concord or the East Mountain Radar Base, kind of call it for short to avoid all the confusion. Because, I mean, I've heard so many terms about it. The East Mountain Radar Base, the Vermont Abandoned Radar Base, the Lyndonville Air Force Radar Station, the North Concord Air Force Radar Station. Like, there's so many different names people call it and refer it to. But I think it is genuinely one of the coolest locations in New England, and if not, like on the East Coast, maybe. Because you have multiple factors there. You have the base, which is so incredible. From a historic perspective, like it just looks really cool with the pine trees. It looks like something out of a movie. It looks like a secret rebel base in Star Wars or something out of Fallout. People have played Far Cry 5. There's like a radar base up on a mountain. There's like the bad guys are hanging out up there. And that kind of like really reminds me of the radar. I don't know if they based it loosely off of that. They might have, but there are other facilities like this, but none of them really compare to the one on East Mountain, to the base itself, and then the views. Like I said, the views are unmatched. I mean, really, it's like you're just up on top of a mountain with 360 views. And again, that's why they chose this location to be a radar facility, because they wanted the most view, and they cut all the trees originally, so it was pretty barren up there. Those trees are the ones that have since grown in since like 60s and 70s.
All right. Yeah.
But yeah, so now if you go, it's really kind of a shell of its former self. Obviously, a lot of the technology and everything has been taken out. And it's been just, again, heavily vandalized, but it's still, the core structures remain, which are really neat to check out. So it's it's an incredible location. It's in my top 10. I mean, I was just actually recently there on a quick trip, and it was just amazing. Just any time to get there. I've been there now, multiple times, and every time it's just as amazing, just as cool.
Yeah, I would love to one day maybe just get a picture of it, and just call it good before it gets completely gone. Like there's a place here from Civil War area where they're talking about demolishing it, and it's like, well, it's not protected, so good job.
Right. Yeah, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, but I'm glad that you mentioned the what was it, the mess hall, mess hall. Because what's funny is before Benny and Barney, they had that other report. Let's see if I can get it up here.
I can. Yeah, the original. There was 2 reports basically from the base of UFOs, right? So at the time in the 60s, you had Project Blue Book going on, right? So Project Blue Book is this government systematic look at the UFO topic, and I believe it was the 3rd official, like, U.S. government sanctioned investigation of UFOs. So you have 2 incidents that are on record in Project Blue Book, and you can find these, like you have them on screen now. They're from the government. Like, you can find them on .gov websites from Project Blue Book. Those files are now disclosed. 2 incidents, and this one was, I believe, was it 59 or 60?
60.
Okay, yeah, it was 60. So it was about a year before Betty Barney Hill thing happened, and this one was a guy that was, one of the service guys that was there, service members, coming out of the mess hall. I think it was like early evening or something like that, and had some kind of saw like a UFO, a streaking object going through the sky. That's kind of, and the description's on there on screen, but that was reported. I imagine he probably reported to like a supervisor or a higher up, not a supervisor, like somebody higher up, and then that was logged. There wasn't any indication from the report that I found that there was like radar tracking of this object. It was just a visual sighting. So like a guy was there, soldier, and he saw a UFO, and that was reported. And then somehow Project Blue Book picked that file up, and and then I think this one, Project Blue Book is known to be quite skeptical and dismissive of a lot of the reports. Kind of like downplaying it. But this one, I think, was corroborated because they believe it was like a meteor. Yeah, because there was actually other sightings in New England around that same time that was later confirmed. So I think that was a fair assessment to say that this was just some sort of atmospheric thing going on, or a meteor just coming through, because you had corroborating other stories from different areas. So that's one of the UFO stories. That one has a solution, right? Or it has a some sort of an answer or attempted answer.
Or what we can, kind of like what I mentioned, with me possibly seeing that meteor. But just real quick, it's like, what's interesting is I think in that same report, it said something to the effect of no sound too. And
so it was just like a very distant kind of thing seen. If you see something moving through the sky, that sort of thing, very far away. But it was interesting enough that they logged it, and then it got into Project Blue Book. Now that's the one sighting of 2 documented from the base, again, through Project Blue Book. So like, these are official. This is not just a guy saying like, oh, there was a UFO, and then we're repeating his word. No, this is like documented government reports that were logged systematically that you can see that are now publicly disclosed. So the 2 reports. And then the second one, which is probably the more interesting, of course, in my opinion, is that of September 19th, 1961. And that was, you gotta realize that these, I guess I'll set the stage, these radars are running, I imagine, like 24/7 up there. They have a staff of 170 service members. They're probably rotating. A lot of these guys are just maintenance. They're doing, all kinds of stuff to keep the base running. I don't know how many individual, let's say there's only 20 to 30 of them that are like radar operators of that group. I don't know. This is a total guess, by the way. But so these guys are rotating, they're doing different shifts. Monitor, you don't have one guy up there for 12 hours, monitoring. You probably have them switching out, going up and down the mountain to the to the barracks and to kind of like the containment area to the top. So they're constantly watching the skies like all the time, because this is a very tense period of the Cold War. I mean, this is like, we get the Cuban Missile Crisis, like all this sort of stuff is happening around this time, or right before, right after, just a very tense period with nuclear weapons, the Soviet Union and the United States in this arms race, space race. A lot of this was going on at that time period. So it was like a very tense period. So these radars are always running. And I find it interesting that like out of all the times, all the many years these radars are running, there was only this incident that was like weird enough that they documented it. So again, September 19th, 1961, they claim that the radar operators up there tracked some kind of object for like 18 to 19 minutes. And it's written there in the report too. I'm going off of just kind of like memory that I have from reading these reports, but they described it as kind of moving in like a semi-erratic fashion, I believe, like kind of left to right. Now, they didn't indicate speed, so I don't know if it was like, oh, it moved over the course of 5 minutes, it moved, from left to right, or if it was like it's zigzag. Like there was none of that really indicated. And so Project Blue Book determined, it was just a weather balloon, right? That was kind of like the generic answer they would give for a lot of stuff: weather balloon, swamp gas, that kind of meme that comes out of like the UFO stuff. Weather balloon, where have we heard that before, kind of thing. So that's with the weather balloon assessment. Now, sure, you could say, yes, maybe it was a rogue weather balloon. Like, I guess that's possible. But it is very intriguing that the connection there is, so September 19th, this is when, this incident happens. We don't exactly know what time. I don't know if it says in the report, like exactly what time this was reported at, but let's say this was, some point in the early evening. Because
5:22 p.m.
Yeah, like 5:22 p.m. around 6 p.m., that sort of thing. And I believe a few hours later is when Betty and Barney Hill, one of the most famous stories up until now, like an alleged UFO alien abduction story, that takes place in Franconia Notch, New Hampshire, which is a mountain range, part of the White Mountains of New Hampshire. It's a notch that kind of and what it is, it's like a mountain range that the road goes through. That's the notch. And Betty and Barney Hill they live in the seacoast of New Hampshire out by Portsmouth. They're coming from Montreal, Canada. This is very close to Canada. And they're driving through the mountains. And this is when they start reporting seeing weird things in the sky. And, this kind of, I don't want to call it a chase, but this sort of pursuit where they eventually then end up saying they see a craft with these kind of people or beings in it. And then they lose time. And I don't want to summarize the entire encounter because it's very in depth. You'd have to.
It really is.
Yeah, you'd have to dedicate a whole thing just to the Betty Barney Hill story. But so sequentially, I believe what they reported was around like 9-10 p.m. towards midnight. Around that time, like it was uncertain. But so sequentially, what happened at the radar base would have been, let's say, 3 hours, 4 hours prior to what they reported. That's interesting because when you're standing on the tallest tower at the radar base today, which I have many times, you look out, you can clearly see Franconia Notch. Like you can see all of the mountains in New Hampshire. You can see the Presidential Range, Mount Washington, Adams, Madison, Jefferson, that whole area. You can see into the South Mountain. You can see like Twin Mountain. Like you see all these different mountains in New Hampshire, and then you see over to Franconia Ridge. You see Mount Lafayette. You see Mount Moosilauke on the other side. You see Cannon Mountain. That's exactly where this incident would have taken place with Betty and Barney Hill. And I think in my documentary, I don't exactly know the specific number. I think it was around 30 air miles. So like if you draw a map on a line from North Concord, Vermont, from the radar base, East Mountain, to Franconia Notch, that's like 30 air miles roughly. That's really not that. I mean, you can make that in a helicopter in 10 minutes, maybe less. Like that's really not very far.
No.
For a craft or an aircraft of some kind. Now, obviously, sequentially, that's quite a while after they reported at the radar base. But is this like a surefire connection between what happened at the radar base and what happened in Betty and Barney Hill? No, of course not. It's a tangential connection, meaning it's just kind of interesting that it happened in the same night. Again, out of all the times this radar base was operating, they had very few instances where they tracked something on a radar that they thought was unidentified. And and you have to realize the reasoning for that, right? So they're up there monitoring for Soviet missiles or aircraft, whatever. They see an object they don't identify. They have to log this because this could be a potential national security threat. So that's why they are making a record of this.
Yep.
That's why eventually it probably ends up in Project Blue Book's hands, because they determined it was not a threat. It wasn't a Soviet bomber incoming to go bomb New York City or whatever the case, maybe however they determined it, but they obviously logged it and that report was there. So it alarmed them enough that they made the report, is what I'm basically saying. And then the same evening, Betty and Barney Hill claimed to have had this encounter in an area that's geographically so close to the radar base. I'm just surprised that more people have not drawn that connection. As tangential as it is still there. And I think it's interesting, because it would be one thing if there's 5 sightings from the radar base and they're all of like a weird object being tracked, right? Like, okay, you could say that's interesting, right? The only report of a radar tracking a UFO is the same night as the Betty and Barney Hill story. Even in that previous one we talked about, it was like a service member just seeing something outside the mess hall. There wasn't radar involvement. So that,
right.
You know what I mean? So like statistically, it's a weird coincidence.
It is.
It may be, but I think it was interesting enough to discuss. And so that's why I talked about it in my documentary. And I had Micah Hanks, who was very tuned into the UAP and kind of aerospace world, talk about the Betty and Barney Hill story, and kind of then talk about the radar base and like go through the sightings there with, as we just showed as you showed the Project Blue Book reports, because that's not hearsay. It's not like, oh, Tom saw a UFO there in 1961. It's like, no, like there is a actual report that they tracked this thing for 18 minutes before losing contact, and they described it moving kind of erratic motions and all kinds of stuff. So I think it's pretty interesting. I know a lot of people would maybe argue, well, again, it's super speculative, but it is. Sure, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. But it's a heck of a coincidence.
Yeah, especially on the same night.
Yeah, if it was like 3 nights later, then okay, I get it.
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
But it's like, come on, man, of all the time. So I don't know. I don't know what happened with Betty Barney Hill either. I mean, that story is obviously interesting too. There's a lot of different dimensions to it. And I'm not going to turn this into like an analysis of that, but I just think it's interesting that it all happened the same night. And then the base continued to operate for another 2 years after that.
If anything, it makes their story more solid. I think that would be a cool way. So one thing I'm going to just do real quick to help you is, so first off, I'm just going to say, I'm going to read a little thing out of this captured book. And I'm just going to do it for the fair use, because I think it would just help with one of the reports for the Vermont side of what we're talking about for North Concord, just to help out. So I'm just going to read this little part here, because to help present what the report even says in a nutshell too. So Project Blue Book received a ground radar sighting report of another unidentified flying object from the North Concord, Vermont Air Force Station on September 22nd, 1961. This ground radar sighting occurred on September 19th, 1961 at 5:22 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, less than 6 hours prior to Betty's first observation of the UFO. The Project Blue Book 10073 card regarding the Vermont sighting reads as follows, transcribed from the Air Commander and Staff College Research Study. So we got the date, which is the 19th of September, 1961, location, North Concord, AFS, Vermont. Air Force Station, I'm assuming. Date, time group, GMT would be 19, and then it says 2122Z, September 19th at 5:22 p.m. Type of observation, ground radar. Photos, no. Source, military. Length of observation, 18 minutes. Number of objects, 1. Course is F, so I'm assuming south. Brief summary of sighting. Return on HF height finder. Radar size of AC appearing as normal target at 62,000 appeared 196 DEG at 84 MI. lost on contact 199 DEG at 80 MI, going northwest, then south, and gradually south on scope 18 minutes. The original TYX on file at the Project Blue Book described the UFO as a large aircraft. Comment: relative slow speed and high altitude coupled with erratic course, including weather balloon. Conclusion: probably a balloon. So I don't know if that really helped, but I think it does in the case of it. So what they were seeing was 6 hours before Betty and Barney Hill's incident.
Yeah.
So
again, intriguing, and should be noted that both the Betty and Barney Hill encounter and this one are both the radar base encounter are Project Blue Book files. So, if you like strictly separate them, there is a Project Blue Book file on the Betty and Barney Hill thing, and there is one on this incident at the radar base. And I just think it's, again, super intriguing that this happened the same night, even though there's not really else much information-wise that we can draw from that.
No, but it's cool that we have a Vermont side and the New Hampshire side.
Yeah, and it just shows you that that's kind of the same area again. Because if you're standing on the radar base and looking out in New Hampshire, you don't know what is what. I mean, it's just a giant landmass, just mountains and 360 view of mountains. You're looking. You can see near Mount Willoughby, or not Mount Willoughby, near Lake Willoughby, the mountains around there. You can see Stowe. You can see Mount Mansfield, Jay Peak. You can see all kinds of stuff. I mean, into Canada, definitely some of the peaks I've looked up there. I'm like, that has to be in Canada, how far away that is, like in Quebec, southern Quebec, there's some mountains there. And then, of course, into Maine, you think you can look into Maine from over New Hampshire. So it's got super great prominence, and it all just kind of looks like one contiguous area, but it's divided up between 2 countries and 3 different states.
Was there a radar by like in Canada at all? Because I think in your documentary you mentioned something about Alaska.
There's a lot. Yeah, so there was a lot of these radar. This was kind of abnormal because it was pretty far south, what was called like the Pine Tree Line and the Dew Line, which were a lot of them were up in Greenland and Alaska and like super far remote Arctic areas of Canada where they had these facilities. I used some of the stock footage like in the public domain from one of the facilities. I think that was in like Greenland or even Iceland, where you can see like the dome, because originally the radar base would have like a tower and it had this white dome over it, and that's where the radar was inside. It would spin around. So there was a lot of them. So this facility was pretty far south for that kind of thing, which kind of surprised me. There weren't a lot. There's not like another one in Maine, or there's a couple others supposedly in upstate New York. I think there's one. I don't know. Again, I don't think there was one in Maine from what I understood, but they would set these up, like secondary lines of defense. Whereas those ones way in the more Arctic remote areas would be like the first lines of defense. Hey, there's stuff coming over from Siberia, from Russia, which is just on the other side there. So, so it wasn't necessarily like a unique facility in that there was many like it in other parts of North America with, kind of like a joint Canadian-American kind of defensive strategy against the Soviet Union. But this one was definitely unique because it's one of the few in New England that are like that. And again, I think it's the coolest one just because the prominence, the location, the remoteness, just getting to it. You're in such a remote area, and you're just seeing moose scat everywhere. It's fairly close to, again, northern New Hampshire, which has a lot of Moose Alley, which goes up to the Canadian border, which is a great place to go moose viewing. Western Maine. I mean, Maine has the highest amount of moose population anywhere in the U.S. outside of Alaska.
Yeah, you're also by that other town. I'm just trying to remember if it's Vermont or New Hampshire. I keep getting it mixed up, but it's like Canaan, like Canaan. Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
I'm not sure. I don't know enough about the area. I just know, like, again, on the New Hampshire side, it's pretty. Once you start getting to that area, it's pretty remote. And it's same thing on the Vermont side in the Northeast Kingdom.
Oh yeah,
it's really just nothing going on.
I just know that if it is that CANAAN or town, whatever, there's another UFO thing that happened there. So yeah, I just forget. It involved a lady though. Paul Bartholomew were telling me about it, and I was just like, "Oh, that's interesting."
Oh,
So,
cool.
but again, that's more northern too, so that's why it's just like,
Yeah, looking at it, actually, I'm looking at a map now. Canaan is actually on the Canadian border, and it borders Stewartstown, New Hampshire, which is near Pittsburgh, which is like very far north, Coas
Okay.
County. So that's a bit further north than the base, but I mean it's also part of Essex County. It's technically part of the Northeast Kingdom, so it's the same sort of thing.
Well, with Betty and Barney too, it started kind of north of that. What would that have been? Would that be considered Lincoln? I'm trying to remember now.
Well, so yeah, where Lincoln is for a lot further south from there, because Lincoln is down towards the White Mountains. But we're technically, if you look at on a map, you have the town of Franconia, and that's when you go to Franconia Notch, which is the mountain pass. You got Franconia on the north side and Lincoln on the south side. So you have to drive to the mountains to get to Lincoln. So from what I understood from their encounter, they started seeing something in the sky towards Franconia and towards the notch itself. And then I've heard that explained away as, oh, well, what they were seeing was the Cannon Mountain tram, maybe going up at night with the light on, because there's a tram, you can take it now. It's a ski mountain. So there's lots of people that ski up there now. And there's like a big tourist tram that takes you up the one side too. That's not like part of the ski lift. It's just like a big, we fit like 30 people in there. When we were filming On the Trail of UFOs first season with Small Town Monsters back in 2019, we took that up to Cannon Mountain so we could because we were filming stuff on the on the Betty Barney Hill thing. And so they said that what they saw was maybe the tram going up at night, and they saw like a light on the side of the mountain, and that explains the UFO that they saw. That's obviously from the more like skeptical side. It doesn't explain their later experiences of seeing craft and like it was close to them and they could see people or things in it, entities, creatures.
Oh yeah, especially with Barney.
Yeah, if you believe the story, of course. But like, I'm just saying that is one of the explanations given, is that it was at Cannon Mountain.
Mm-hmm.
And then as they're driving through, and their actual supposed abduction didn't happen until they got closer towards the town of like Woodstock and into Lincoln area, just north of there. I think one time when we were filming, we tracked down like the general area of where it happened, where they claimed that like they actually were abducted. And it's now, there's like houses and stuff there. It used to be like a field, but now there's a bunch of like housing, stuff like that in that area, just north of Lincoln, New Hampshire. And there's actually, if you go through there to like the Woodstock, New Hampshire area, I guess technically it is Lincoln. It's just north of there, actually. Woodstock's a little bit further south. But if you go, I don't know the exit, but there is a gas station that has a like a mural of an alien on the side. And it says like close encounter, 1961, September 16th, September 19th, 1961, Betty Barney Hill. And it's like a cool little tourist spot. And the gas station has a bunch of UFO like information on the sides, and they sell little souvenirs with like Betty and Barney Hill stuff on it, just little alien kind of cheesy stuff. But if you drive down the street from there to the Indian Head Resort, next to the Indian Head Resort, there is a historical marker, which says one of those like green state markers that says the Betty and Barney Hill encounter, and it kind of encapsulates what happened. So that's kind of cool. So if you're interested in going to see that, you're going through the White Mountains. You have Lincoln, the main tourist stretch, where you start getting into like going out towards Lincoln Woods and Loon Mountain and like a lot of the ski areas. The second exit up from there is where you hit the gas station on the left. I don't know the name of the gas station. It might be like an Irving or something like that. It's a small one, and then you'll see the UFO on the side. And then if you keep driving down the road from there a few minutes, you'll hit Indian Head Resort, and just like on the right side of the road past Indian Head, you'll see it. There's like teepees and totems there. There'll be like a marker on the side of the road that says the Betty and Barney Hill story. And that was
found it.
Yeah, that was put in a number of years ago. Somebody I know actually was involved in like helping set that up. So,
oh, that's awesome.
It's cool because it's commemorates ufology and in paranormal circles. The Betty and Barney Hill story is one of the most well known in the world. So it makes sense that they would at least have some kind of a homage to it in New Hampshire where it took place.
Yeah, it was. 2011 when the marker
Yep.
got set up. Yeah, I'm looking right at it from Google Maps. So, yeah, gotta have it saved for a future destination that I'd love to go check out. So, yeah, that Indian Head Resort is literally like a quarter of a mile from where you're talking for the marker. So it works.
Oh yeah, no, it's literally right
there.
Yeah, it's like right next to the resort. And then
Yeah.
going south from there, you hit that gas station. Like if you're going, it's funny. Like when I've gone to the radar base before, I've done like the Barney Hill, full UFO road trip, kind of joking around. But you start there, you go to the gas station, and then you go to the Barney Hill marker, and then like 2 hours later, you're finally getting to the area of the radar base, and you're like, that's the full scope of the encounter, or at least the full scope of 1961, September 19th, kind of UFO history.
It's cool how it works like that, though. So, from wherever it would be considered, I don't know if it would be the marker, because, like I said, so it would be that other place. That, how do you pronounce that again? The Fort Tarum Notch or whatever. How do you say that?
Franconia Notch.
Franconia, yeah.
Yeah.
It would be interesting. Have you ever tried to see if you could, like, I don't know, see the radar base from that area?
I don't
probably
think
too far away, but
yeah, I mean, because you got to realize on either side of Franconia Notch, you have some of like the best hiking in the whole East Coast.
Yeah, that's true.
You have Franconia Ridge, which is on the right, and I've hiked all of these. It's amazing. Cannon Mountain is on the left side. That's where the ski mountain is. You can hike that, and then there's other mountains there, North and South Kinsman. Beautifully rugged, incredible hikes. But the Franconia Ridge Trail is truly something else. You have Mount Lafayette, and you go like there's 4 different mountains that are above 4,000 feet that you hit there. Lafayette is 5,000 something, I believe. And then the others you're just under 5,000 in the 4,000 range. You have a Little Haystack, Mount Flume, Mount Liberty,
nice,
all in that area. And it's just like incredible because you're hiking on these exposed ridges. It's like something, a lot of people don't think the East Coast has that kind of terrain, but it
you do. It really does, yeah.
It's considered, the Franconia Ridge Trail is like a world-class hike. And it's,
what about
the Pemigewasset Loop, which goes, which is kind of like this circular mountain range. And then it goes into other mountains too. And it's incredible. But yeah, it's like I've stood at the top of Mount Lafayette, and I actually haven't looked in the direction of the radar base, but I think it's just too far away.
It would seem like it. Yeah,
you would maybe see the mountain, but you wouldn't be able to see the radar base. Like when you're in just like kind of, where would it be on the map? It would be like Northumberland, New Hampshire, south of Colebrook. And on that drive, if you were to look left from there, and I've done it a few times driving there, and you look left up into the mountains, you see these hills, these mountains, and you see these 2 squares on it, because you're only at that point, you're less than 30 air miles, so you're able to kind of see it. But that's as close as you'd be too far away from Franconia.
No, just out of curiosity, from where that is, where all this mountains you just mentioned, how far though from there is it from like White Mountain? I'm familiar with White Mountain a little bit.
The White Mountains, so that's all part of the White Mountains.
Oh, that is part of.
So Franconia Notch, those are all part of the White Mountains. That region, it's part of the White Mountain National Forest as well. I mean, you have the Franconia State Park and that sort of thing, and that's actually where the famous rock formation that no longer exists, that's on New Hampshire's license plate and coin, or the quarter rather, the Old Man of the Mountain.
Oh yes,
rock formation that was on Cannon Cliff, so that would have been where Betty and Barney Hill driving through, this craft that was following them, they would have passed by the Old Man of the Mountain at that point, which was there. The Old Man of the Mountain is no longer there. It fell down in like 2003 or 4 in some kind of
but it
split off the mountain. It was a huge rock formation that looked like a face, and that became an emblem for New Hampshire.
Right? Didn't they though make some sort of pole or something where you can be where they supposedly, I've heard, like if you stand just right, you can kind of vaguely see like where it was or something.
Yeah, so there's a little hiking trail there on the side of the road where you can go up, and they have it's like a metal recreation of the old man's profile, the face, and if you line it up with the side of the cliff, that's like it'll show you where roughly the face was and kind of what it would look like. Because I remember when I was younger hearing stories about it, but I was a kid when it basically fell down. And a lot of the younger generations never saw it. They've only ever heard of it. It's just a rock formation, right? So it's in that area. So it's a very famous and well-known area. So having like UFO history on top of everything is pretty cool. And it's all kind of this neat kind of Northeast and Northern New England lore connecting with the Barney Hill story and the radar base. And I don't know. I think it's pretty cool.
No, I totally agree. I think to wrap it up, because like you said, I mean, we wouldn't probably need like an extra 10 minutes to talk about Betty and Barney, but the fact that like, you know, I still find it fascinating that when they came back, though, I'll just say this much, is when Betty was under hypnosis, she drew the star map, which pretty much how many years was it later or whatever it was by the
I don't know off the top of my head, to be honest with you.
It was quite a bit until we actually figured out that her drawing was
Beta Reticuli or something like that.
Yeah, like it came very close to what we ended up finding.
Right.
So
yeah, I have heard that story. I mean, it's just what do you want to believe, right? In terms of, did they get abducted by some kind of extraterrestrials? I mean, I've heard theories that a lot of that like abduction stuff in the 50s and 60s was secret government black ops programs, like abducting people. I mean, we know the government has done all kinds of horrific experiments on people before, not unheard of, right? MK Ultra, to say the least. So who knows, like, what happened to them? Obviously, something happened to them. I don't know, you know, what the motivation would have been to kind of come out with that story. And it didn't come out right away. It's not like the day after it happened, they were like, hey, this is what happened. It was later. It wasn't, I don't know. At least from what I understand, it wasn't like an immediate thing. Like, it took a while.
It was like 5 or 6 years later or something.
Yes,
like
it was
that.
later. Like, they told some people, I think, close to them, but it didn't really get out into the wider public until later. And then, of course, you know, nobody really knew about the radar connection at the time because Project Blue Book was under wraps. I don't even know at what point that report, like that specific radar-based report in Project Blue Book, would have even been disclosed. So, you know, at the time when the Betty Barney Hill story was breaking the news in the 60s, in that time period, I don't think people were really even discussing the radar base because they didn't even know that there was this possible correlation. This came much later.
Well, I think it's because they just shrugged it off as the balloon.
Well, yeah, but my point is, it wasn't even public. Like, the government would have had that report for national security reasons under wraps. Project Blue Book was not made public, I don't believe, until later. So it wasn't like the day after Project Blue Book examined the report, let's say it was in 1963. They're like, okay, time to release it. Like, they sat on that for a while. So there wasn't really the ability to make the connection, I don't think, with the radar.
Oh, it definitely came later.
Yes, that's my point, is like the entire incident, whatever happened on that night in 1961 on September 19th, like, we're still discussing it, you know, 60 plus years later. Whatever happened, something happened, but you know, it wasn't until years later that people even knew about the Betty Barney Hill thing, and then probably later they found about the radar thing. And it's still kind of, again, I've talked to people, I mentioned this earlier, I've talked to people in the UFO topic who were very surprised to hear when I mentioned, did you ever hear about this radar-based connection? Like, they just haven't really drawn that connection. I just don't think it's as well known as, you know, obviously the Betty Barney Hill story.
Right.
But maybe it is a part of that story. That's my point, is like, maybe this is a part of that story.
I mean, it definitely, to me, feels like it should be a part of the story, because it just is another piece of evidence to back up their claim, I guess.
It certainly doesn't hurt their claim. I mean, that's, if we're being honest, like, it certainly doesn't.
No, it backs up the story. That I can even say that
something happened. It backs up the fact that something, as coincidental as it is, the government was concerned enough about a unidentified craft that they logged it and tracked this thing, right? So make of that what you will. I think, as with my documentaries, I like to kind of leave it up to the people. Check out the evidence there, and you make up your own mind. Don't let me make up my mind or your mind for you, right? So,
so just for the viewer, this is the documentary that we're sort of discussing anyway, sort of, where Alex and his little crew that he ended up acquiring to go to the radar base back in 2024. You said May, so this came out on July 10th, 2024.
Yes. Yeah,
so
came out 2 months after it happened. So yeah, it's a fun documentary if you like Cold War UFO history, which I think is really interesting. The Cold War is obviously such a time that, I think now it's funny, maybe because we're not living in it right now. The Cold War has this like sort of mystique to maybe us younger people. Obviously, the people that grew up in the Cold War probably weren't too fond of it because there was, the duck drills and, all this stuff about nuclear annihilation. That probably wasn't a fun time. But I look back at like the Cold War. I find that as like a super fascinating time in human history because you have so much going on technologically. Like Cold War weaponry, Cold War small arms. I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. Like the weapons and the technology coming out of the Cold War were incredible. The space race, arms race. It was like, because it was like a fear of missing out. You had your
had to be.
We have to be the best. We have to keep innovating. Like a lot of the technology and like weapons and guns and firearms, things that we use now, were basically pioneered during the Cold War. Like two of them. I mean, just in terms of like guns. Two of the most common assault rifles in the world, the M16 and the AK-47, were created during this Cold War time period, and they're still proliferating everywhere, 60 plus years later. And so again, like Cold War UFO history has a particular interest because you think about like, all the Roswell, all the different stuff, Project Blue Book, Hynek, all these interesting chapters to that story. We're still talking about it so many years later. Now we're going through our own stuff with the UAPs and all the hearings and everything weird that's going on. But Cold War history, if you like it, check out the documentary because we go into detail about the history of the base, the kind of the sightings, the Project Blue Book reports, as we've talked about tonight. Micah Hanks does a wonderful retelling of the Betty and Barney Hill story, some of the chapters involved. And then if you like the urban exploration, abandoned places, like really cool stuff, we actually go physically to the base and show it off. And again, just kind of showcase our experience there. And it's tough when you're camping up there to like not look around and wonder, like, man, imagine those endless nights for almost a decade where these radars are spinning and these people at any moment, the Soviets are coming. It's World War III. That never happened, and it's like you sit there wondering, like, I don't know. It's one of my favorite documentaries I've done in a long time. Just the music, everything about it. If you like, again, Cold War UFO history, abandoned places, check it out. A lot of people seem to enjoy this documentary when it came out, so super thankful for that. But it's a super unique location and a really cool story.
Definitely. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. I'll just say I just rewatched it again today just for the chat too, just because just in case I wanted to bring anything up that you may have not shared or something to the effect of like maybe the journey or the base itself, but I can't. I think we did a pretty good job. Plus, I don't want to ruin everything anyway because the documentary is good too. So yeah. Especially seeing the abandonedness of it. Like I love abandoned stuff, and that's what I'm saying. Like maybe one day I can go up there and take my own picture of it, just to say that I've seen it with my own eyes. But
you definitely should. Again, I think it's one of the. Again, I've said this before, probably multiple times in this podcast. It is one of the coolest spots I've ever been to. I mean, it's in my top 10 for a reason. I've been all over North America and many other places, in search of all kinds of different mysteries. And it's a place that always sticks out to me. Just a combination of factors we've talked about this whole podcast.
Yeah.
Why, if you're into any of this kind of stuff, it is super cool. It's
perfect.
Like, so definitely worth checking out if you get a chance. And, I recommend it.
Yeah.
Just be careful. It's dangerous up there. I will say
it definitely has become more dangerous now.
People have died up there. People have fallen off the towers. It's a hazardous place. There's a lot of rust and asbestos and that kind of stuff. So please be careful if you do go up there. We
are not responsible for your dumb stupidness.
No, people are going to be stupid anyway. I've seen plenty of stupidity up there, but
I'm just stating for this too. So check it out. So anyway, we're gonna just swap right over real quick because this will just be the end because it's just not really going to be nice and short and sweet, I think. But anyway, the fact to this now, Alex, is I would have gotten up to grab a copy just to show it, and I don't have the image ready right at the moment. But you helped out with the documentary from last year's Kickstarter, the From the Beyond, High Strangeness in the Bennington Triangle by Small Town Monsters. Anyway, so talk to us just a little bit about that. How did you get recruited to help out, or were you already supposed to help out? You weren't just one of those like emergency backups?
No, yeah. I mean, so when we filmed last June of 2025 out in the Bennington area, that's when we interviewed you. I believe was around that time. I didn't actually meet you then when we were there.
No, you were out that day. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, the crew from Ohio and Aaron from Texas was coming up to Vermont to film this documentary and some other Sasquatch related stuff in Vermont and the surrounding areas in upstate New York. Me being a Southern New Hampshire guy, it's only a few hours from me to the Bennington Triangle. So obviously they were going to have me come over as a core crew member of STM. I was going to come in, and I'm a licensed drone pilot. So I do a lot of like the drone filming you see in a lot of the documentaries. So I do like the B-roll and the drone stuff, but knowing stories from the Bennington Triangle over the years, like I knew Joseph Citro many years ago, was a friend of mine. Other folks involved in that topic, Paul Bartholomew, of course, others. I was asked, like, was there any people or stories that I wanted to involve in this Bennington Triangle thing? And a lot of them, people were already, Heather and I were already brainstorming, and other, Seth and Heather and the creative crew, people like Joe Citro, and I mentioned Paul Bartholomew and others involved. And one that I really wanted to involve was a friend of mine named George Clifford, who ended up in the documentary, who had this really interesting story he told me, which, I mean, I'll share it now because it's in the documentary, so it's out there, but it really stuck out to me. It was the summer of 2023. I was actually in Alaska. I drove up to Alaska and I spent a month in Alaska. So I was gone for like a month and a half in the midsummer. I got back in like late July. And a friend of mine messaged me. He was like, hey, he knows this guy, George Clifford, as well, who had, George Clifford was somebody that used to watch my YouTube channel, which used to be called Sasquatch Out of the Shadows, and now it's Aleks Petakov Adventures. But he used to do a live stream show, and George was always in the comments, and we'd message back and forth. And he had some kind of an encounter in the Green Mountain area with something possibly Sasquatch-like. So I knew of George, but our mutual friend, my buddy, messaged me, said, dude, George has this really cool story, something that happened to him. Like, he kind of told me a little bit of the story, but I met George then in August at an event in like Schenectady, New York, or just outside of Albany. There was like this museum that had some Bigfoot stuff and some other like animatronics. And it was kind of this cool little museum in this mall. And they were asked if like I was willing to do a presentation about like some of the Champ stuff at Lake Champlain. And that was, so I did that. And that was Steve Coles as well, was participating there. Steve Coles, the Squatch detective from upstate New York. He's done a lot of stuff in the Whitehall area. And George and his wife came out, and I'd seen them every year at the Whitehall Sasquatch Festival down in Whitehall, New York. It's an awesome local event. It's only a few hours from me as well. And it's kind of all the New England people come to that. So I'd met George before. I knew George, great guy. And he meets me at this event in that August of 2023 there at that mall in upstate New York. And he tells me this story about what happened to him. And I was like, my God. So he was working as he does like Uber and stuff for hikers. So there's a lot of people going through like southern Vermont with, from Bennington up towards Rutland. Of course, you have the section of the Green Mountains, beautiful southern section of the Green Mountains. That's where the Appalachian Trail goes through, but also the Long Trail, two very world famous hiking trails. George,
I just want to say real quick, is it's funny. Not that many people realize that it's part of the Appalachia Trail.
Yeah, that's the area that goes through there. So you have both of those going, and the Long Trail, which is basically Vermont to Canada. It's like the full length of the state. A lot of people do those long distance hiking trails. So George was working as an Uber driver, and he was doing pickups, and he kind of ended up in like the network as sort of like a driver for some of these long distance hikers, right?
Correct. Yep.
And he tells me there's this one day he picks up this girl. She's solo, and she's kind of all disheveled and a little bit worried. And she's like, I need you to drive me to Burlington. That's the closest, major airport. Yeah.
Yeah.
Even though it's a small regional airport. And she's going to fly back home to California. He's like, oh, okay. Whatever. I think he takes her out because she wanted to go get some food. And, it's in a place like Bennington and down in that area, Rutland. I mean, it's very far distances to get anywhere, as living in Vermont. Like, you're going to Burlington is a couple hour round trip drive, if anything. So she basically, has him for the day as the driver. She wants to get home. She goes to get food, and then he waits for her. And then, they have a little bit of time, hour and a half, probably more, driving up towards the airport in Burlington. They start talking, and he's like trying to ask her, what's going on, like what happened. And she said something to the effect of, and I'll never forget him telling me this, something is wrong with your mountains. Just like, okay, perfect line, right? And he starts asking her, like, so he's trying to, with being respectful and asking her what happened. She had, I guess she was from California, and she was hiking, I want to say it was the Long Trail. I don't think it was the Appalachian Trail. I think she was doing the Appalachian Trail. He said looked like she was well
equipped. Goddard Shelter, I think.
Well, yeah. So I'll get to that point in a minute.
Oh, okay.
But what she was doing was she wanted to do, like, she was doing a long distance hike, from like the Long Trail. I believe it was Long Trail. And so she says that she's hiking up on Glastonbury Mountain, which I'm sure you and your viewers know, long history of weird stuff, Bigfoot, aliens, missing time, abandoned town, missing people, like all this stuff in one area. And it's nowadays, it's like, other than maybe that Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, is like genuinely one of the toughest places in Vermont to get into, because it is a designated wilderness area. So there's no roads or anything in, like, you have to hike a long time. But back to George's story. So he says that she is hiking on Glastonbury Mountain, and she spends the night at a place called Goddard Shelter, which is this shelter way up in the mountains. It's like a 8 or 9 mile hike one way from a road to get there. You're in the middle of nowhere. She's alone. She's setting up her tent. Usually these long distance hikers, they don't stay in the little shelter, which is like a lean-to. It'll be like 3 walls and an open face. That's usually what these kind of lean-tos look like. They're not like closed, like a closed cabin. They're just enough so you can get out of the elements for long distance hikers. Usually these hikers don't like to stay in those. They'll just do their own tent off to the side. She sets up. She said there's no one else up there, and she's kind of going to sleep, and she starts hearing like this weird baby crying sound. Like, it sounds like a baby crying noise. She thought it was really weird, like, but there's animals that can make that kind of sound and whatnot. And I guess she didn't get a whole lot of sleep. And then next day she packs up and she hiked another 10 to 12 miles. I don't know the exact distance. She gets to a different shelter. Same thing. She's alone. She sets up her tent and then ends up hearing this same kind of thing again. Baby crying sound. I mean, we're talking, she hiked all day to get there. Like, she's hearing this same exact noise at this second shelter. And apparently it freaked her out. She barely got any sleep. And after that, she packed up first light and basically headed down the mountain. And then that's just so happened to connect with George. He was the driver that picked her up, coincidentally. Like, there was no planning there or anything like that. So he told her, or he heard this story from her, and he was kind of really interested by that. Like, that's weird.
Yeah, and he was trying to comfort her by saying, hey, it could have been this type of animal, because
he was, like running, oh, maybe it was a fox, like maybe it was this, and I think in conversation with him when he first told me this back in 2023, he's like, I mean, it was a little weird here that, like, if it would be one thing if it just happened at the one shelter, right? Like, it happened at Goddard, she goes to another shelter, all good, nothing. But it's like, it happened to 2 places. Did something follow her? I mean, that's the assumption, right? Who knows? It was enough that she quit the entire hike and went back home to California. He said, like, she kind of wrote about it. She looked like she was pretty prepared for long distance hiking. She didn't look like she was, just out of her league kind of thing in terms of preparedness. So that was a weird story. And then what's interesting, it's like, he tells me it was either the next day or like within 2 days of when he picked her up. He's doing his thing. He picks people up. He was in this network. He's picking all these hikers up, taking them to town. Because a lot of times they're on these long distance hikes, like the Appalachian or Long Trail, and they want to go into town, spend a couple days in a hotel, do laundry, eat, and then they go back to the trail. It's kind of how these long distance hikers do it. He picks up a group of people, and it was 3 people. It was a couple, a guy and a girl. There were a couple, and then another friend of theirs who was like hiking with them. He picked the 3 of them up. The couple sitting in the back, other guys in the front seat. And they're just making conversation, going to town. I don't know if it was to Rutland or wherever it was. George has the details, I'm sure. And they just start talking, and he always like, oh, one thing I like to do to break the ice with some of these long distance hikers is, hey, what's your craziest
What's your
trail
story?
What's your funniest story? Because these guys, I've done this too. I've done section hikes in the Appalachian Trail, and when I was hiking the New Hampshire 48 4,000 footers, I would pick up the Appalachian Trail hikers, along the way, because they'd be hitching rides on the side of the road, and I'd pick them up and take them to town, and they usually they'll buy you a dinner, like, for your generosity of just picking them up. You're being like a trail angel. Yeah, you hear all kinds of funny stories. I've run into them in the mountains, and like they spend 6 months in the woods. They have a lot of crazy stuff that happens to them, right? So he's talking to these folks, and he's like, tell me your craziest story. And they're like, oh, what do you mean? He's like, well, for example, like the other day I picked up a girl. She was quitting the whole trail because she said that she was hiking and she heard something making like a baby crying sound. And he says he's looking in the rearview mirror, and he sees the guy and the girl look at each other and like gasp. And they said, that's exactly what happened to us. He says, well, really? Happened at Goddard Shelter. Same thing. They were up there. They heard this baby crying sound. And then George says, the guy in the back with the girlfriend,
I saw Bigfoot.
I saw Bigfoot. George says, I didn't utter those words. I didn't bring up Bigfoot. I just told them about that girl as like an example of the story that happened. The guy says this. The girl says she didn't see Bigfoot, but she saw something like a shadow or something big move. The guy in the front didn't see it. I don't know if they were like, they're probably in different tents, or if they were in the shelter, different positioning or whatever, but they all heard it. So yeah, I remember George telling me this, and I was like, my mind was blown. I'm like, what? That's crazy, right? So as soon as I knew we were going to be doing a Bennington Triangle documentary, I'm like, you got to interview George. This is like one of the cooler contemporary stories that I've heard from the last, 15, 20 years from that area. Like, there are others, but that one was one that came from a source that was not an author or a researcher. Nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying this was like from somebody that I happen to know that just told me and a mutual friend this story. I was in Alaska all summer, so he couldn't tell me when it happened. But he told my mutual friend, like, I know Alex is in Alaska, but like, here's what happened. And then when I finally got to meet George a couple months later, he told me, and I'm like, that's really neat. So I thank George immensely for sharing that story. That's another thing, like we talked about with the Betty and Barney Hill thing and the radar base, like coincidence, right? This happened the same night. But here's another coincidence. You have one area in Glastonbury Mountain that's known for a lot of weird stuff. Goddard Shelter, very hard to get to, remote location. And you have two different groups. We'll say the girl, she's, first group one, even though she was alone. So she had no corroborating witnesses to what she experienced, but she experienced at two different shelters, miles and miles apart. And then you have a group of three people who all hear something. Two of them see something, and one claims it was a Bigfoot. I mean, like, and this happened within the same week. We're talking like this was either the next day or 2 days. So we're talking like this all happened, let's say, within a 5-day span. Whenever, George picked these guys up, like, let's just say that's on the long end, could have been back to back.
Or was she coming down when they were heading up or something, or vice versa,
I think the way it would have worked was she was coming down the mountain, George picks her up. And then, like, if it was the next day or the day after that, that means that they would have been coming down. So they could have been, around the same time or like within 20. It's hard to say. And I had asked George, I'm like, do you have any of their info? Like, I'd love to talk to some of them. And he's like, I don't have the log. Like, the apps don't keep the logs like that, because that's like user information. It's confidential. Even though they sell our data everywhere nowadays. But, if you want to access it, you can't. But like the corporations can, and then sell all this stuff. And it's crazy. But anyway, back to that story. It kind of blew my mind. And I just think it's a really cool story. And it adds to the whole Bennington Triangle allure and kind of lore, if you will. And just the coincidental nature of it. And these were not people that were into the paranormal or Bigfoot or anything. They were just hikers.
Yep.
Hikers going about their thing, and it freaked one of them out enough that they just gave up the whole thing, and the other people said they saw something weird. Uninitiated. The one thing, if George had mentioned, like, oh, there's Bigfoot stories, and they said, without prompt, that's what they saw. So how cool is that?
It is very cool.
We don't know what happened, but that's something because George's interview was in the Bennington Triangle film, of course, and we talked about all the other stories, the the missing people and all the different tales. You talked about a lot of the stuff too that you're aware of. But at some point here, I will be, because I interviewed George too about what happened. We did a little conversation and the full story from his
point of view. Yeah.
From
that'd be great.
He was the one who was there. So I sat down with him, and then, I'll have a project on that coming out at some point. I don't want to say too much more about that, but that is, that's going to be, an upcoming endeavor in one of my episodic kind of series. So, yeah.
Hey, if I could even help out with anything for it, just because of it being Bennington, I would gladly help too, if I could. So,
yeah, it's something that I already have the conversation with George, but again, I don't want to reveal too much of
don't worry.
Happen, but
yeah,
it's certainly an interesting one, and it's just really cool story. I love hearing stories like that in the wild, when they first kind of happen. So. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much the most recent Bennington story. And I did hear a story actually from a friend of mine. He hasn't told me the full story, but something that has happened to him so recently as well. So that area does seem to have a history. And I have friends of mine who are researchers who have done stuff in that area and have heard of other stories of like Sasquatch-like sightings and then all the other weirdness associated with the Bennington Triangle. It's a cool area. There's a lot of weird stuff going on in that part of Vermont. And that's, the direct opposite of like the Northeast Kingdom. If you look at it on a map, Bennington's way down in the south towards New York and Massachusetts, and the Northeast Kingdom where the radar base is on the other side of Vermont. So it just goes to show that Vermont has a lot of weird stories throughout the whole state.
That's right. Especially when it comes to weird vortexes down in Bennington, which is what I also encountered a couple weeks after being filmed from you guys. So,
there was a guy we interviewed too, the professor there from Pennsylvania who had that weird
Dr. Bob.
Yeah, time slip thing that he had happen, which you hear about these stories a lot, but to have it be so contemporary and have the guy who actually experienced it tell you it, not just like, oh, this was recorded by this person. No, this is like this. Describe what happened to him.
Yeah.
So
could that happen to me?
Up there? I don't know, but the area has that allure, and it's a really cool area. It's a cool part of Vermont, rather.
And indeed, man, I just can't believe that it took me 5.5 hours to find these graves that should have only taken me 20 minutes. But what was odd about it was when I was trying to use my phone, because I didn't have a compass or whatever, but I was just trying to use something to get back to some sort of trail. Even my GPS was trying to get me to go further into the woods. And it just got to the point where I was just like, you know what? I'm putting this back in my pocket and I'm just going to do the whole Boy Scout thing where I'm just going to trust my Boy Scout instinct, basically.
Fair.
So, yeah. There's definitely something weird going on. But I just wanted to share that because...
There seems to be. So, yeah, it's been a lot of fun talking about some of these cool Vermont areas. Again, as a guy who's from kind of the neighborhood here in New Hampshire, fair share of cool stories here, but Vermont definitely has some very unique ones, and the Bennington Triangle and the radar base are pretty high on my list for sure.
All right. Well, Aleks, I appreciate your time. Hopefully it's not overburden of your time here, but I appreciate it. And what can we look forward to for your closing thoughts or closing comments of what we can see from you this year?
Yeah, so at the moment I'm working on what's called the Journey to Ape Island, which is one of the Small Town Monsters Kickstarter backer features that'll be coming out to streaming later this year or into next year. But if you're a Kickstarter backer, you will see it before that. And that is an adventure documentary, my journey with my friend Jason Hewlett from Canada, where we go to Vancouver Island, British Columbia, largest island off the west coast rather of North America in the Pacific, which is known, of course, for stories of Sasquatch and weird ape-like creatures over the centuries. So we do a really deep dive into the island and go to a lot of remote locations. We interview indigenous people and authors and researchers who delve into that subject. So that's a fun kind of adventurous documentary that I'm working on. And then other than that, I've just got my YouTube episodic stuff that comes out on the Small Town Monsters channel, stuff like Bigfoot Beyond the Trail and other things. So, you'll be able to see this Bennington one as well at some point here in the near future on probably on the Small Town Monsters YouTube channel, and then maybe some other locations as well. So that's kind of what I have going on for the rest of 2026.
Awesome, man. Well, again, I appreciate your time, and for everybody else, you know the drill. Whether you're inside the Green Mountains or outside the Green Mountains, we'd love to hear from you. And with that being said, you can always check out hauntedvermont.org, where you can check out everything that's going on there between our ghost stories, whatever. You can submit your stories, stuff like that. Otherwise, if you don't like to do that route, you can always do Haunted Vermont 802@gmail.com to get a hold of me. That's sometimes always easier. And then I know Alex doesn't really like to share it sometimes, but if you want to, petakovmedia.com is where you can find all of Alex's stuff. But I don't know how well he keeps it up to date. So I guess
I keep it very well up to date. That's with Small Town Monsters, we have a lot of different projects going on. So I put all of my specific projects on that website. So that's the best place to find out. And other news about like events. I'm doing one event actually in your neck of the woods there in
August.
The end of August. Yeah, like Cryptids in the Mountains or something like that. A friend of mine from back in the day who has a cryptozoology news Facebook page. I think that's what it's called. So they're putting this conference on, and I'll be sharing some stories about my like searching for cryptids, and it's kind of going to be about like the good, the bad, and the ugly of like the cryptid research world. And I'm kind of going to share some stories, and there's going to be other presenters and other stuff. So that's, I think, August 29th and 30th. I want to say the last weekend in August in Vermont. So if you're around, come check it out.
Definitely. And then a month later, you got the Whitehall Sasquatch Fest. So
yes, right. End of September, Whitehall, be speaking at that. And that's one of my favorite events. Just a great, fun local event.
Yeah. So that's going to be September 26th this year for people.
Yes. Last weekend in September.
That's right. And it's also known as the National Ghost Hunting Day. So what a perfect day. Cryptids and ghost hunting.
That's cool.
Interesting. So yeah, there you are, folks. And then I guess until next time, until we have Alex on again to talk something, I don't even know. But thank you for watching.